The popular image of a pirate is a man with a wooden leg, a parrot on his shoulder, and a map to buried treasure. This romanticized view, however, barely scratches the surface of a brief, brutal, and fascinating period in history. The Golden Age of Piracy, roughly from the 1650s to the 1730s, was a time when the high seas were a lawless frontier and a pirate's life was one of both rebellion and incredible danger. This era was not just a collection of swashbuckling adventures. It was a symptom of the political and economic turmoil of colonial empires. And the pirates who roamed the seas were a complex mix of desperate men, former sailors, and ruthless outlaws. This era of piracy was a fleeting one, lasting only a few generations, but it left an indelible mark on history and gave birth to some of the most enduring legends. From the lawless dens of Nassau to the decks of the fearsome Queen Anne's Revenge, this was a period when a common sailor could rise to become a king of the seas. So, how did this age of piracy begin? What was life really like for a pirate? And what brought this legendary era to its sudden end? The origins, from privateers to buccaneers, the roots of the Golden Age of Piracy can be found in the perpetual wars of 17th century Europe. For decades, colonial powers like England, Spain, and France were locked in a cycle of conflict, primarily for control of trade routes and colonies. To harass their enemies without committing their own navies, governments issued letters of marque to private citizens. These individuals, known as privateers, were essentially government-sanctioned pirates. They were legally permitted to attack and capture enemy ships, with a portion of the loot go into the state. This system created an entire class of experienced, battle-hardened sailors who learned how to live and fight on the high seas. The problem came when the wars ended. The Treaty of Madrid in 1670, for instance, ended the war between England and Spain. Suddenly, thousands of privateers, men who knew nothing but life on the sea and fighting for loot, were left unemployed. With their letters of marque no longer valid, they had a choice: return to a life of poverty or continue doing what they did best, but without government sanction. Many chose the latter, becoming pirates. These former privateers, many of them based in the Caribbean, came to be known as Buccaneers. They preyed specifically on Spanish ships laden with gold and silver from the Americas. They operated from lawless havens like the island of Tortuga, a small island off the coast of Hispaniola that served as a headquarters for these early pirates. The rise of the pirate republic. By the early 18th century, the center of piracy had shifted. As European navies grew stronger, the buccaneers were driven out of their strongholds. They found a new home in the shallow waters of the Bahamas, and specifically, the port city of Nassau. The harbor was a natural fortress for pirates. Its shallow entrance made it difficult for large, deep draft warships to enter, but its vast inner bay provided a perfect refuge for a pirate's sloops and smaller vessels. Without any real government control, Nassau quickly became a self-proclaimed pirate republic. The society that pirates created was a fascinating contradiction to the rigid hierarchies of the day. A pirate's life was democratic in a way that naval ships and merchant vessels were not. Pirate crews operated under a set of rules called the Articles of Agreement, a kind of constitution that outlined how they would live, fight, and share their loot. Each man signed these articles, agreeing to abide by them. The pirate captain was not an absolute tyrant. He was elected by the crew and could be voted out if he was deemed cowardly or ineffective. The quartermaster often held more authority in matters of daily discipline and was responsible for dividing the spoils fairly. Every crew member, from the captain to the lowest sailor, was entitled to a share of the loot. Injured crew members were compensated for their wounds according to a pre-agreed-upon scale. This system of shared risk and reward was a direct response to the brutal, hierarchical, and often unpaid conditions on naval and merchant vessels. Despite this semblance of democracy, life as a pirate was brutally harsh. Violence was a constant threat, not just from the navies hunting them, but from within their own ranks. Disease was rampant, with scurvy and other illnesses claiming more lives than battle. And if a pirate was captured, their fate was sealed. The hanging of pirates was a public spectacle, a clear message from the colonial powers that their actions would not be tolerated. Icons of an era, Blackbeard and Captain Kidd. The Golden Age of Piracy produced a cast of unforgettable characters, two of whom stand out above all others. The most famous pirate in history was Edward Teach, better known as Blackbeard. Blackbeard was a genius of psychological warfare. He cultivated a fearsome reputation not by being a ruthless killer, but by creating a terrifying image. He braided his beard and wore lit fuses under his hat to create a cloud of smoke and fire around his head during battle. His flagship, the Queen Anne's Revenge, was a formidable vessel. Blackbeard's goal was rarely to engage in a long fight. Instead, his menacing appearance and theatrical tactics were designed to force his victims to surrender without a struggle, preserving his crew and his ship. His reign of terror along the American coast came to a violent end in 1718 in a climactic, bloody battle with the British naval force. Another famous pirate was William Captain Kidd. His story highlights the murky line between privateering and piracy. Kidd began his career as a highly respected privateer, hired by wealthy investors to hunt down pirates and French privateers. However, after a lack of success, he eventually began attacking ships that were not his designated targets. He was eventually accused of piracy and captured. His highly publicized trial and execution in London in 1701 were a high-profile warning to all who considered a life of piracy. The fall of the Pirate Republic, the end of the Golden Age of Piracy, was as swift as its beginning. The very thing that had fueled its rise, European conflict, would also lead to its end. The War of the Spanish Succession 1701 to 1714 had temporarily brought back privateering, but its conclusion once again left thousands of sailors without work. This led to a surge in piracy. This time, however, the colonial powers were prepared to deal with the threat once and for all. Piracy had become a serious threat to global trade, and something had to be done. In 1718, King George I of Great Britain issued a royal proclamation offering a general pardon to all pirates who surrendered by a certain date. To enforce this pardon, the king appointed former privateer Captain Wood S. Rogers as the new royal governor of the Bahamas. Rogers arrived in Nassau with a simple and brutal mandate: give the pirates a chance to accept the pardon, but be prepared to hunt down and execute those who refused. The pardon split the pirate community. Many, like Benjamin Hornigold, accepted the pardon and even became pirate hunters themselves. Others, like Calico Jack Rackham, accepted it but soon returned to piracy. And a few, like Blackbeard, openly rejected the pardon and continued their reign of terror. Their decision proved fatal. Blackbeard was hunted down and killed in a famous battle. Other defiant pirates were captured, tried, and hanged. The loss of their safe havens, coupled with the increased presence of powerful naval forces, made the pirate's life increasingly perilous. Within a few years, the Pirate Republic of Nassau was gone. By the 1730s, the Golden Age of Piracy was over. Legacy, from high seas to Hollywood, the historical reality of piracy was often brutal and short-lived. Pirates were not noble adventurers, they were criminals. Their lives were filled with violence, disease, and the constant threat of a hangman's noose. Yet, their story endures and has captured the imagination of the world. The romanticized image of pirates, popularized by works like Robert Louis Stevenson's Treasure Island, has made them enduring symbols of rebellion, adventure, and freedom. They were men who rejected the strict hierarchies of the day and created their own rules. This rebellious spirit, a rejection of the colonial powers that were fighting over the globe, has made them timeless legends. Their story serves as a reminder that even in the most lawless of times, people can create their own societies. For better or worse, the Golden Age of Piracy may have been brief, but its impact on popular culture and history is undeniable.